Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, good afternoon, almost evening. Thank you all so much for coming today. As some of you may have noticed, some of our returners here, the weather has cooperated. It's sunny out. So thank you again. It's lovely to have you all. And we are excited to get started with our amazing, impactful discussion today. I'd like to thank all of our viewers who are tuning in online as well. My name is Rebecca Lewis, and we are appreciative for all of the experience that we have here in this room, as well as some of our young future leaders joining us today. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador Jane Hartley.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, and thanks to Rebecca Lewis from our embassy for organizing this event, and to Davina Hurt, the former mayor of Belmont, California, for chairing what will be a very interesting discussion, I think. And thank you especially to an excellent group of mayors and city leaders who are participating. Mayors Marvin Reese from Bristol and Tracy Brabin, did I do that right? Brabin from West Yorkshire, City Council Member Susan Aitken from Glasgow. We practiced that before. And Mayor Eric Simmons, all the way from Greenville, Mississippi. So I'm thrilled to have you here, and thrilled to, and really so grateful for what you do every day in terms of making sure this is an issue that we deal with, and we deal with it efficiently and quickly. So on that, we all know that climate change is impacting the planet in unprecedented ways, and we all feel the effects. But it's also true when it comes to environmental change, low-income and minority communities are often hit the hardest. They're the most vulnerable to heat waves, floods, severe storms, and droughts, all of which are now more extreme and more frequent. So one of the things that we focused on in the United States is the idea of a just transition. A just transition is the idea that as we move to a greener economy, we must help the communities that are most impacted by climate change. And that's the topic of our panel today. And it's not a coincidence that we're hosting this event as we celebrate Black History Month in the United States. So now, from the very beginning of his presidency, President Biden has made it a priority to address this issue. Frankly, before his presidency, I heard him talk about this many times in the campaign, and frankly started talking about it when he was vice president in the Obama administration. During his first weeks in office, after President Biden immediately rejoined the Paris Agreement, and an aside, I was U.S. Ambassador to France during the Paris Agreement when we signed it, when both President Obama and John Kerry worked so hard. And I was so pleased that President Biden realized how important it was to rejoin. He also established the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the first of its kind. He pledged that at least 40% of the overall benefits of American investments in renewable energy and other climate-related infrastructure would go to disadvantaged communities. And once again, he has been pushing, obviously we know what he's done legislatively for climate, but the way he looks at it in terms of just transition, I think is quite different than I've seen from almost any other administration. And most recently, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, which is the largest investment in American history to combat climate change. It includes $60 billion in dedicated funds to revitalize the hardest hit parts of our country, the U.S. On the global stage, the United States is also supporting the Global Shield, an initiative to better protect those countries that are most vulnerable to climate change. The bottom line is this White House is taking America's responsibility seriously and, in my view, finally putting our money where our mouth is. And now, as America's ambassador here in the United Kingdom, I want to facilitate an international discussion on this issue. Because it's important, and I know this from my previous experience both in the White House and as ambassador to France, it's important if these things are going to work, we have to build links across government, private sector, academia, to share experiences, ideas, and especially new approaches. So when it comes to climate change, we can't just have presidents talking to prime ministers or even just secretaries of energy talking to each other. We need collaboration across all layers of government. And in that, we count on the leadership of our mayors, all of you, and our mayors from back home. And as we talked a little bit previously, I'm not saying this to butter you all up, but I love mayors. I've worked with mayors throughout my public service career, and I've worked with mayors from all around the country, both the League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and many more. But what I really saw in doing that was how effective mayors can be. And as the former mayor of my home city of New York, who I know quite well, Mike Bloomberg, used to say, everything starts at the city level, and you really do build from the ground up. He also used to say, if you want to change the world, run for mayor. And I think he's absolutely right, because mayors have their finger on the pulse. They can implement change right away. They're problem solvers, because they almost have to be, because they're quick to hear from voters if there's a problem. And I don't think it's an accident when scientists first started warning us about climate change. Mayors were some of the first to take action. So today we have with us the Mayor of Bristol, which was the very first UK city to declare a climate emergency and develop an emergency action plan in response. West Yorkshire has done the same, and Mayor Babin is doing some incredible work to make sure workers in her city have the training and skills to transition to greener jobs. Mayor Davina Hunt, leading our panel, was a member of the very powerful California Air Resources Board, which really led the entire U.S. toward tough new emissions standards on vehicles. And I thank you for that. You guys really were the leaders. Mayor Simmons has made ecological restoration and environmental concerns a focus of all infrastructure projects along the Mississippi River, something everybody should think about, because that river is the most important river system in our country. But he's thinking also beyond his own city and coordinates climate policy with other cities and towns, which is a very good thing. And of course, I want to recognize our friends from Glasgow. Beyond their work to make Glasgow a greener city, they were outstanding hosts for COP26, pushing the world to make the 2020s a decade of climate action. So it really heartens me to see so many of you here, and thank you all for your hard work and dedication. You are all ambassadors, in a sense, for innovative, impactful solutions to the climate crisis. Hopefully, we can soon share all our successes and learn from each other. And we're going to do a little bit of that today, because the climate crisis presents us with an opportunity to transition to economies that aren't just better for the planet, but better for societies as well. So again, I thank you for being here tonight. I look forward to the discussion, and especially grateful for all your hard work, because you guys really are leading the way.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Ambassador. Can we have another round of applause, please, for the Ambassador? Thank you. As the ambassador stated, we are currently in Black History Month in the US. This is a time to not only use for reflection, but it's a time for us to use as an acceleration tool to make a difference, to make a change. So hence why we're here today to have the discussion, the Mayor's Transatlantic panel on just transition to net zero economies. And I would like at this time to welcome our esteemed panelists to the stage. Okay, and please join me in welcoming the leader of Glasgow City Council, Susan Akins. Thank you. The Mayor of Greensville, Mississippi, Eric Simmons. The Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Brabin. The Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees. And this evening's chair, the former Mayor of Belmont, California, Davina Hunt. Thank you all.
Oh, I'd love some. Well, thank you for that introduction. That was a long walk, it seemed, up to the stage here. Very excited and honored and humbled to be here with the dignitaries that you just heard mentioned. I'm hailing from the city of Belmont, San Mateo County in California, and as was stated, my name's Davina Hurt, and currently I'm serving as the vice mayor and current California Air Resources Board member. So it seems like just yesterday, when the new year began, all of us are building back together for a more stronger, sustainable community. And 2023 is definitely being labeled as the race to green. As we all emerge from the intense years of the pandemic and set our eyes to the horizon and a just transition, the North Star for government must be equity. And our bedrock must be collaboration, with community and business to continue building sustainable, safe, and vibrant communities of the future. So, question number one. As the ambassador has stated, President Biden's administration made a priority to advance environmental justice and to address the disproportionate impacts that climate change is having on vulnerable and marginalized communities. And supporting the priority, the Biden administration has committed to reducing U.S. economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030, and equitably achieving economy-wide net zero GHG emission by 2050. Near-term policies are absolutely needed to reduce emissions this decade and set up the economy to eliminate or remove remaining emissions by mid-century. We are also aware that unique solutions are city or context specific given the vast range of economic, social, and environmental conditions that each of our cities have to contend with when putting in place optimal policies to create a climate-ready future. All the while, the city-specific solutions must center community voices, and they must address injustices that have disproportionately impacted Black and brown, tribal and indigenous people, and other historically vulnerable, marginalized communities. So, with our first question here, let's start off with each of you telling us in a few words your community makeup, like population, attitudes, and values in place, and then define for us what building blocks you're putting in place to facilitate a just transition that truly spreads social and economic benefits for all, while also meeting ambitious climate action. And I would add that it's also important to state who is at the table with you as you're creating those building blocks? And what sort of cooperation is needed to make sure cities can deliver? I promise the questions get easier after this. I promise. So, you know what? Let's start with Mayor Braben.
Well, thank you, and what an absolute pleasure to be here today. And thank you all for taking the time to come and listen to us. Because in your opening remarks, I'm pleased that climate emergency is seen as the North Star, and as a mayor of a northern community, I see the resonance there. But certainly, President Biden's focus on collaboration, because we all hope to collaborate, not just in the UK, but obviously globally across the world. And your Mayor of New York said that we as mayors are the tugboats pushing government into the right position. So here we are pushing government. So West Yorkshire is a community of 2.4 million people. It's 5 regions, including Bradford, Leeds, Wakefield, Halifax, and Huddersfield. It's a diverse community. It's incredibly young, but its makeup is quite extraordinary. It's in the heart of the UK, and it actually reflects the makeup of the UK. So if you were a tech company, for example, you could use this as a sandbox to reflect the whole of the UK, because we are a really great reflection. We've got 7 universities. We are focused on innovation. We were one of the pioneers of manufacturing and the real engine room for Great Britain's success. And now I want to pivot that manufacturing expertise into the green industries, and targets are where it's at. Our target, and I'm really pleased that all my 5 partners also share the same target, 0 carbon by 2038. Incredibly challenging, but we are in a position where we can deliver with sums of money that certainly I was an opposition MP before I became the Mayor of West Yorkshire, and in opposition you have no money and no power. As Mayor, it's one of the best jobs in the world because you have money and power and you can set the agenda, and we are going to be the most progressive and the greenest region in the UK.
Thank you. Mayor Simmons.
Thank you so much, and I want to thank the ambassador for having us. My name is Eric Simmons. I'm Mayor of Greenville, Mississippi, the largest city in western Mississippi. But Greenville is a very unique city. It's a 30,000 person city. We have a poverty rate of 38.6%, about 75% African Americans in that city. We have partnered with MRCTI, Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, insofar as no one city can do this climate work alone. No one state can do it alone, no one country or no one continent. And so I work with a group of mayors, 103 mayors along the Mississippi River Basin, which we feel the Mississippi River Basin is primed to lead in climate performance because it's 40%, it produces 40% of the world's agricultural commodities, but 1 in 12 folks eat food every day from the Mississippi River. And so when you begin to think about climate impact, climate disasters, I think about the flood of 1927 that was responsible for the Great Migration of Black folks going up to Chicago. And so what happened at that point in time, when the flood hit us, Black folks were left right there on the levee as sandbags to block the water coming into the city. So now those same Black and brown folks are right there on the river, and they're left with beachfront property. They're there having the brunt of all of those disaster impacts that we see day in and day out, whether it's flooding or the drought that we're coming out of right now. And so on behalf of the folks there in the city of Greenville, I think this discussion is great, but how we begin to talk about equity is making sure that those folks who bear the brunt of those climate impacts are at the front of the discussion. They're at the front of the discussion when it comes to green jobs. They're at the front of the discussion when it comes to education. They're at the front of the discussion when it comes to training our youth in regards to resilience and green jobs and infrastructure. And so I look forward to this conversation, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Leader Atkin.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. With all due respect to Tracy, I don't think you're from a very northern city at all. I'm quite a bit further north.
Fair point well made, yeah.
And it was really really nice to hear the ambassador talk so warmly about Glasgow as the host of COP26. What it both seems like a lifetime ago, and also that we're still just recovering from it. It was the biggest thing that we've ever done. Glasgow is Scotland's biggest city, the fourth biggest city in the United Kingdom, a city of 630,000 at the heart of a metropolitan region of just over 2 million people. And we are probably one of the preeminent post-industrial cities in Europe. A city that was one of the engines of the Industrial Revolution, the thing that got us to the mess that we're all working together to try and get out of now. But not only that, one of the cities that most exemplifies what happened when heavy industry collapsed and when many, many thousands of people lost their jobs and those jobs were not replaced. In essence, modern Glasgow was the result in many ways of an unjust transition in the latter half of the 20th century from the heavy industrial, high carbon age into a post-industrial era. So as we go into the post-carbon era, which we are aiming to do as a city by 2030, a very significant challenge because our industrial past has left real legacies on the physical fabric of the city, as well as on the social and economic fabric of the city. As we go towards that idea of just transition is particularly important for us. This is about historic redress because there are so many communities in my city, including young people who weren't alive at the time, who still live with the legacy, the continuing legacy of a significant gap in life expectancy, for example, of generational unemployment, of generational harms that have been done to people as a result of that unjust post-industrial transition. So like Eric, we are absolutely determined that it is those citizens who are front and centre in helping us to design the just transition. And we've done that through the framework that we created of our Glasgow Green Deal, which sets out the target to get us towards equitable net zero carbon climate resilient living by 2030 for everyone. Just in the run up to COP26, Christiana Figueres, who was a former head of the UNFCCC, described Glasgow as a quintessential city in transition towards that post-carbon future, and said that when delegates came to Glasgow, they would see literally in front of them that shift from that post-industrial era to a post-carbon era, with all of the challenges and the barriers that we have to face. And you know, every city to a certain degree can see a bit of themselves in Glasgow and see their own challenges that they face on this journey. And it was I have to say, one of the proudest moments of my life when during the closing plenary of COP26, and of those of you who were there, maybe in person or who watched it, might remember it was very, very tense. There was a point where it looked like there might not be any deal or any agreement at all, far less the Glasgow Climate Pact that emerged from it. But one of the EU representatives who was there said that they had found Glasgow to be a miracle city. Now, I'm not sure that we've quite completed our miracle. In fact, I know that we haven't. We've still got a lot of miracles to deliver for Glasgow in the next now 7 years that we've set for the target we've set ourselves. The clock is ticking fast. But I think that we have delivered enough miracles so far in our transition, in our transformation, in demonstrating the resilience that we have as a city. And at the heart of that, a few years ago, the New York Times, in a travel piece, actually a kind of tourist piece, described Glasgow and Glaswegians, as natives of Glasgow are called, as humane, political and refusenic. And that actually really does sum up Glasgow. We kind of, we always have edge of urban grit, if you like, people who don't take any nonsense, but with absolute humanity at the heart of it. And it is all about bringing people with us, bringing our communities with us on this journey, because if we don't and we have another unjust transition, this will be one that we won't recover from. It will destroy our resilience. So this time, we have to do it right, and we have to learn the lessons of the past.
Thank you. Mayor Rees.
Thanks. So I realise I'm in the embassy, so I don't want to cross any diplomatic lines.
Go for it.
But I really appreciate hearing a representative of the US national government speaking with such clarity and confidence on the relationship between race, class, and climate. Even the environmental movement has a long way to go to be as inclusive as it needs to be. Even though it's full of progressives, that doesn't necessarily mean it's racially astute. So one is that's great, and it's also great to hear about collaboration. And one of the arguments we make repeatedly is that international collaboration is not limited to national government to national government. In fact, that can get in the way in the zero-sum, hard borders world of international diplomacy. We think place-to-place connectivity, national and international coalitions of cities moving together can actually offer the scale of change that's needed, and beginning to work with finance can offer the scale of markets that are needed to attract private finance to deliver change too. As for my own city, Bristol, we are a city of 472,000. We're a very fast-growing city. I describe us as we are 42 square miles, and most city leaders will recognize this challenge. We are 42 square miles. We're not getting any more land. We have 18,000 people on our waiting list. When I came in, it was 11,000. But we have built houses at record numbers since I've come in. But still, the waiting list goes up. We have amongst the highest unaffordability ratio of housing amongst English cities. It is a crisis, right? Shift to private rentals as well, as opposed to government housing as well. So we need to meet that challenge, but we need to meet it in those 42 square miles in the context of climate and ecological emergencies. At the same time, Bristol is a city that has a fantastic story to tell to the outside world. 2 world-class universities, the home of Banksy. We have a thriving tech sector. 1/3 of the world's natural history broadcasting that you see on Netflix, Apple, National Geographic comes through Bristol. And yet 1 in 4 children, and probably rising now in Bristol with the cost of living we're just working out, lives in poverty. 1 in 5 children at risk of hunger. So we're a wealthy city that sits with those inequalities. And it's not just the presence of poverty, is it? It's the presence of inequality that has the real, for which we pay a political price. And the reason that's important is because, again, I think sometimes the environmental movement has come up with pronouncements that have not taken account of the fact that there is a context within which this happened to have. And that context is that, as the ambassador said as well, those who have historically been most marginalized and are present day most marginalized pay the highest price for climate change, but they're also most vulnerable to the consequences of the economic restructuring we have to go through to decarbonize the economy, and they're least well placed to take advantage of any opportunities that come from that economic restructuring that we have to go through. On voice coming in, I mean, I think actually with myself and Tracy and Susan here, you see an example of the kind of change in politics that's needed. Tracy's the first woman Metro Mayor in the UK. Susan leading the capital city up there, and apparently when I was elected in 2016, I was the first mayor of African heritage in Europe, which is quite remarkable. That's not, well, thanks very much, but I think through all of us, just by the change in nature of that political leadership, there is a different kind of ear to hear different kinds of voices and a different ability to bring new voices to the table that perhaps haven't been at the tables of decision-making in the past.
And Mayor, like you stated, mayors from a bottom-up climate action leads the world. But if you can look on the stage here, we have 3 women. And so I would just say that if we listen to women more, we probably can solve the climate problem.
Yeah. I'll second that. I'll second that.
Wise words.
Exactly, yes. So considering the centrality of fossil fuels to the global economy, and with the deep integration of almost all sectors and societies with the carbon value chain, A just transition is not just relevant to those working directly in energy, as originally coined by global trade unions in the 80s. It has the potential for greater application. Decarbonization entails systematic transformation at every level of governance and all sectors of our economy. Actions such as decarbonizing the housing stock, transportation, and land use can increase or decrease inequality and poverty depending on their delivery. So I would love to hear from Leader Atkins. Tell us about a decarbonization project in your city that is supporting a just transition. We'd really appreciate hearing like the basics of the project, the challenges, and the successes in project completion. And specifically, you know, how are you supporting the vulnerable and disproportionately impacted communities that we've all spoke of?
So I'm going to go back to housing again, actually, because I think not only is housing and that whole area one of the biggest things you can do in terms of actually getting those emissions down in big chunks. It underpins so much of social justice. People living in poverty who are also living in poor housing are doubly affected and indeed find it much more difficult to get out of poverty if they're living in poor quality housing as well. And I'm not going to say that this is a finished project in Glasgow. It's far from it, but it is something where we're seeing tangible success and tangible progress, and where I think the potential for much, much more and for really underpinning just transition and economic transformation alongside transformation of our environment and our energy systems, there is so much potential there. So it was really only about 20 years ago that Glasgow had some of the worst housing stock in Europe. The social rented sector, the council, the city council that I now lead, was the landlord, and it was dreadful. Frankly, it was close to being a slum landlord. And then there was what was called a stock transfer, and the entirety of the social rented housing in the city was taken away from the council and given to a network of community-led housing associations, local housing associations, registered social landlords, of whom there's now a network of more than 80 in Glasgow of varying sizes, some of whom just look after the housing stock they've got, others are building constantly. And we remain, as the council remains the strategic housing authority. But that shift started the transformation, the physical transformation of Glasgow over the last 20 years, which is part of that miracle that I talked about earlier. And you will still see sometimes pictures of Glasgow of kids playing on what look like just urban wastelands, you know, playing with broken bottles and things like that. Those images don't really exist anymore. They're often associated in people's minds with Glasgow, but actually those areas have been transformed and the quality of the housing has been transformed. But alongside that, the energy efficiency of the housing has been transformed. And what we were able to do was start with our social rented sector, with the housing that the poorest people in the city lived in. Often those people who were coming from that post-industrial generational poverty background. And we set the highest standards, frankly, that we thought we could get away with then, and have maintained those. So we call it the Glasgow Standard for energy efficiency, but also for space within the homes, for things like adaptability as people get older, all of those things. But energy efficiency, the key thing here. And over time, and this has not been overnight, but there has been a series of demolitions and rebuildings and refurbishments right across the city, which have transformed that housing stock. And just the other day, I saw a map in relation to work that we've been doing in our city region about retrofitting the remaining housing stock. And Glasgow sits at the centre of 8 different local authorities that make up that city region. And if you had asked me who had the biggest job to do in terms of retrofitting, I would have said probably us, probably Glasgow. But it was the opposite, actually. We've got less work to do than our neighbouring local authorities. And it's because of that leadership by social landlords and crucially by the communities, because all of these landlords, all of these housing associations have local committees and boards which are chaired by tenants. So they are genuinely tenant-led, community-led. They've led the transformation, and as a result of that, the job that we have to do on our social rented stock in terms of retrofitting for energy efficiency is nowhere near as big as you might think it would be. So that gives us hope for the next bit of the job, which is retrofitting all of the rest of the housing. Because the reality is that the vast majority of homes that people are going to live in the future have already been built. And most of them haven't been built to certainly not in the United Kingdom, haven't been built to the levels of energy efficiency that we will need them to be for a zero carbon future. So we've done a huge amount of work on that, building on what we know we have already achieved, and knowing that we created jobs and new skills over that past 20 years through that regeneration and refurbishment and rebuilding of our social housing stock. We believe that we have 450,000 homes across the city region, which are the highest priority for refurbishment. Most of them either owner-occupied or in the private rented sector, so more of a challenge there. They're not in our control in the way that the social rented sector is. We think that the cost of retrofitting that will be about £11 billion, which I don't have to hand, funnily enough, as a city leader. So very much looking to partner with the private sector to deliver that. But the feasibility work that we've done through our Green Deal that I mentioned earlier, and I'll not throw in a lot of numbers, but just the kind of high level, the benefit to cost ratio that we're seeing in the feasibility work that we're doing on that £10 billion investment is spectacular. You know, the consultants that we got in to do it said they've never seen anything like it. You know, it's 14 and above in terms of the returns that we get in economic and social value for the communities that we need it most. We think we will create between 12 and 20,000 permanent jobs for every year that we are working on what will be a 10-year transition programme. We've established in the city a Just Transition Skills Commission, which I chair, but which is very much a partnership with community representatives, with our universities, and particularly our further education sector, which is the more applied learning, I suppose, the colleges in Scotland, the vocational learning, because that is probably where most of those skills are going to come from, with the private sector, and crucially with community leaders and with the people who have had the experience of doing this already through the transformation. So we're not there yet, but we've got a clear pathway and with all of that, it will deliver a reduction of at least a third in our overall emissions in the city as we go on that journey towards net zero. So much opportunity there to generate to generate value from a big investment, yes, but an absolutely vital investment to generate new permanent skilled jobs and highly skilled jobs and a whole range of them across the construction sector, and to give people energy security. And this goes back to what Marvin was just mentioned about this cost of living crisis that's particularly acute in the UK here just now. And it is energy and fuel bills. In a country that is not warm, where people need to put their heating on at this time of year, and believe me, even more so the further north you go. And right now, there are people in my city, in some communities, more than 60% of people literally making choices between heating and eating right now. If we make that investment over the next 10 years to get every single person in the Glasgow City region living in a decent home that they can afford to heat, or in actual fact that they don't even have to put their heating on very often at all because the house keeps them warm. You know, that actually is the ultimate aim. The house itself keeps them warm, keeps them safe, keeps them secure. That is, I think, one of the biggest wins and an absolute underpinning of just transition as well. So we know it's deliverable because we have done a big chunk of it already. There's a massive chunk still to come, but what we've already achieved gives us the confidence that this can be a success.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Housing is an important piece, as well as transportation when it comes to decarbonization. And I'll just open the floor up to maybe another mayor before moving over to the audience to see if there are any questions. Are there any decarbonization projects folks would like to share?
Well, I would suggest that we all have our own decarbonisation project, and in West Yorkshire we have the Better Homes Hub. Social housing is across the whole of the UK, and it's more carbon inefficient to take down that housing and rebuild. But what's been really helpful is, as a mayor being directly elected, coming in with a manifesto pledge of 5,000 affordable sustainable homes, I've been able to draw together all the housing partnerships and housing associations to come under a West Yorkshire Together partnership board, where we all doing the heavy lifting to get those 5,000 affordable sustainable homes. But of course, it's not just the new ones, exactly as Susan says, it's also retrofitting. 1,300 we started on with retrofitting. It costs £60,000 almost per house. It's eye-wateringly expensive. But the cost of living crisis has also turbocharged that work, another 1,700 in order to get homes warm. And actually, why are we doing it? Of course, it's to hit the zero carbon targets, but it's also to help the quality of life. I grew up in social housing in a flat in Batley. I know the importance of having that warm, secure home. But meeting a woman called Chloe who was saying, the reason why I'm so delighted that my home has been retrofit is that family life is better, that the kids now can go in their bedroom and do their homework because it's warm enough, rather than all being in the kitchen fighting. So these are the small, tiny, tiny wins about the quality of life. But certainly our investment, I mean, it's £10 million of our resources, but I know that that will also help when it comes to skills and jobs, and I'll talk about that more later in other questions. But retrofitting homes is so expensive. We have a government that's prevaricating about what they want from the sector. So there's not an appetite to really jump in with both feet. So we have to lead. We have to say, we want these houses retrofit, and make sure that we get those businesses to come with us to do it at speed, because it's a matter of urgency.
Thank you.
I can say in America that President Biden, with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, is creating a vehicle for Black and brown communities in an equity way to begin to make those building improvements, design improvements, get new construction materials more green, but also how you become energy efficient to allow folks, like you said, Susan, who's making a determination whether they're going to eat, buy medicine, or create a more green home. And so with the Inflation Reduction Act is creating that vehicle. What you'd find often, not only in America but around the world, is the places that are in most need of the help are the least equipped to get the help. And so there must be a lot of technical assistance to help these small communities. We saw in America the Rural Partners Network, which is a whole of government approach. USDA Secretary Valsack came with Congressman Thompson to the Mississippi Delta to try to make sure rural America get the technical assistance that they need to apply for these things. In Greenville, Mississippi, I have 30,000 folks, but I have an engineer. But around Greenville, Mississippi, every town and city around me has less than 1,000 folks. They got a mayor that comes to work twice out of the month. That's 2 times for the board meeting. They ain't got no engineer. They ain't got no accountant. So how can they apply for those large-scale government vehicles to get the resources to their people? So technical assistance is needed. On an equity level, this Rural Partners Network is putting folks at a help desk, but now USDA is talking to EPA, EPA is talking to DOT, and so now you got about 14 agencies, and they have these help desk folks in rural America right now in America that's helping these small communities apply to these large-scale vehicles like our Inflation Reduction Act or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to get these resources down to the folks. The person in Greenville is no less than the person in New York or DC when it comes to the resources they need to be more equitable, to have these green jobs, and more importantly, to create ecologically and economically beneficial products and services to the folks that these vehicles are intended to help.
Thank you. I think Mayor Reeves wanted to say a few things, and then we'll turn to the audience.
I'd love to talk about City Leap and a project we've done in Bristol, but if I just pick up on the theme, that this is about money, right? I've been to no end of mayoral gatherings, and mayors sit round and people tell each other best practice, but we'd all be doing best practice if we could afford it, right? So you show me a best practice project, first question, how much did that cost, right? And I think the challenge is, how do we begin to get those sums of money that are moving around the world, looking for somewhere to land, how do we equip the leaders that are best placed to make that money work, to deliver outcomes? How do we put them in touch? And at the moment, there's a disconnect with the trillions of dollars that's looking for somewhere to land, right? And the place level leaders who can actually make it land. And I think that's the challenge that we need to take on. And it's one of the challenges that COP should be all over. By the time we get to COP, we should have pipelines of pipelines of decarbonisation investment projects lined up over the next 10, 15 years. Right? It is not impossible to do that. So we've got to get gritty. One of the phrases I am least comfortable with, and I use a very polite way of describing my perspective on it, is when people say all that's needed is political will. Right? As though if it's not happening, it's because you didn't have enough will. Right? No, you need political will and a few £billion.
That's some money.
Right? So let's get that lined up, and we'll begin to see some movement.
Thank you. And I believe that we have here the Senior Advisor, Deputy Mayor of Environment and Energy from Mayor of London's office here with us. Yes?
Yes, thank you. I'm work for Sadiq Khan, and he sends his apologies he can't be here, not least as chair of the C40. He knows the leadership that mayors do all around the world. And certainly something that's really important for Sadiq is making sure that the transition to net zero is equitable. He knows it's the most vulnerable people who are breathing the most poisonous air. It's those who are most vulnerable who find it hardest to warm their homes. It's people who are the most vulnerable who live in areas that are susceptible to flooding. Just as we heard on the Mississippi, it's the same in London, I'm afraid. And that's why when the mayor declared a climate emergency, he saw it as an issue of social justice and move forward, just like Tracy showed leadership, move forward London's transition to net zero to 2030, which is not going to be easy, but we're not all going to be on New Year's Eve in 2049 just waiting for us all to make the leap together. If we're going to get to net zero, it's going to take leadership, and it's the mayors and the cities and the regions that will come from. So that's tried to inform what the mayor's done on a variety of fronts of how we get to that transition. The work that he's doing to retrofit existing homes, he's been able to get money out there through the Mayor's Warmer Homes Fund, but as we've heard, it takes money to make this movement. We do get some money from central government, but again, there's an issue of a lack of trust in knowing how our city, how our regions work. So they come with criteria that isn't best fit for London. So we're not able to use the Warmer Homes money on anything more than 10% of the social housing in London. And we can do things of our own money that's around 10% of what we get from central government to show the best practice, to show how we could reach the most vulnerable people first. But that gap remains as to how much power we have, to how much we can do. Similarly, around the work that we've done on unlocking the power of Transport for London to be powered by renewable energy. We'll be putting in imminently for that to have a PPA agreement to be powered by renewable energy. But what we'd love to do is to get London generating more of its own renewable energy and using that money to fund the retrofitting that we're doing and looking for those powers for what we can do on that. There's just a limit on what we can do and where, with the goodwill that we have with the political leadership, but also lacking the money and lacking the powers that we need to get it over the line. And I think that's the challenge that mayors and local leaders know they face, is to both convince the power in the centre to give it away and then use it to make sure that it's done in the most equitable way possible. And that's what Sadiq will continue to push for. And I know he works with the great leaders on this stage as well to achieve it.
Thank you. So let's indeed turn to the audience and see if there are any burning or pressing questions that you all have. And if someone has the mic, maybe we can lead it over to the hands that are raised.
Good evening. First, I wanted to thank all of you so much for being here. It was a really riveting conversation, and I'm already trying to plot which city I should move to after London. Glasgow, you're looking good. So when I think of climate change and the approach to resolving it, it almost feels like a bit of a hydra. For every issue that you solve, there are two that pops up in its place. What comes immediately to mind is fast fashion. How many conversations were we having about fast fashion 20 years ago versus now, and the impact that we see that it has on the environment? So with that being said, obviously your hands are full with issues that we're aware of, but I'm wondering what you are thinking about for the future, things that aren't necessarily in your line of sight now, but may come to negatively impact your city in the future, and what you're doing to future-proof yourself and your citizens.
Thank you. Any thoughts from the panel?
Right.
Sure, please.
I loved, by the way that so many hands went up. Immediately, if this was in Scotland, everybody would go, I'll wait for somebody else to go first. But you can tell there's a lot of Americans in the room. You're completely ready to go for it, which is brilliant. Do you know, it's really interesting that you should mention that fast fashion thing, because I don't think it was something, although we've done work that is embedded in our climate emergency action plan and the Glasgow Green Deal around the circular economy. I don't think when we did that work, which wasn't very long ago, we really pulled out the piece about fast fashion and the impact. But actually right now, through a series of coincidences, we're having conversations with the UK Fashion and Textiles Council around recycling fabrics and about onshoring production. I think that the fashion industry is more aware than it has ever been of its appalling reputation when it comes to sustainability, but not only sustainability, also the working conditions, and not only working conditions in places like Bangladesh, but also in cities right here, in places like Leicester, for example, where we know that there are some appalling working conditions for primarily women working in the textiles industry. And they know that they're going to have to address this, because younger generations, quite rightly, you know, the Greta generation are quite rightly rejecting this and saying we're not having it. And at the same time, the impact of Brexit, for example, has made that offshoring model that they've relied on for so long actually not economically viable. So they are very seriously looking at how they address both their reputational and the underlying structural economic issues that they've got within the industry as a whole. And while they might be being kind of forced into that position, if you like, I think there is a real opportunity there for cities to find both physical space for that onshoring and advanced manufacturing returning to our cities, and also a skills pipeline to sustainable clothing and sustainable textiles manufacturing here in these islands. So, and there are challenges there as well, of course, because you know there are a lot of women in countries, in developing countries, whose livelihoods depend on this as well. So there is a real balancing act there. You know, it's not all about onshoring. It also has to be forcing the fashion industry to improve the working standards of it and the pay of its employees abroad as well, in other countries. But there are routes there, I think, where the decarbonising of fabrics and the decarbonising of what we put on our bodies is an opportunity that perhaps we haven't thought of and haven't particularly up until now, certainly speaking for Glasgow, it's come to us as a rather belated opportunity, and we're now sort of thinking, right, this needs to sit in there along with housing and transport and nature-based solutions and all of the other decarbonisation projects that are the more obvious ones perhaps that we know that every single city is pursuing. So just the fact that you mentioned that I thought was very timely, because those conversations are starting to take place in the early days.
So I think Bristol's going to give you a run for your money. Maybe it's not Glasgow. I think Mayor Reid said he wanted to add quickly to this conversation. Yes.
Yeah, I think some of the politics around climate, that's a threat. We'll do the work that we have to do in the short term, looking at our energy networks, looking at transport, retrofitting our homes, building, efficient homes on brownfield sites in active travel distance to the main retail and all that type of stuff. But I see a little alignment here that I think is a big political threat. And it is the fact that I'm on the Mayor's Task Force for Climate-Driven Migration. We're looking at the potential of 150 million climate-driven migrants by the middle of this century. You place that on top of the instability that could be visited upon Northern Hemisphere countries from climate change and the restructuring of climate change if people get left out. You layer on top of that the toxicity of social media as a vehicle for public debate with predatory politicians who go around looking for despondency and stitched it into extremist, I mean, it's close to home, right? Stitch it into extremist narratives. And I think you have an environment for some very dangerous politics over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And by the way, that is a reactionary politics that we found expresses denial of human-driven climate and steps away from the policies that would actually deliver the structural change we need. And I think that's one of those simmering threats that we need to be aware of.
Could we take another question? I see a hand raised in the back there, really high.
Hi.
Oh, there we are. No, go ahead.
Sorry, he didn't.
Yeah.
Rosa Wilkinson. I'm from an organisation called the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. I should admit I'm also a very proud product of West Yorkshire.
Yes.
As I was listening to your remarks through the session, it struck me that the title for our event could be read in a number of ways. We can change it. The Mayor's Transatlantic Panel Discussion on a Net Zero Transition to More Just Economies. Yes. It does seem to me that apart from the protection we need to afford some of our most vulnerable communities, there are real opportunities that we must help them to seize. Mayor Aitken, you've just begun to touch on some of that with your comments on green shoring, whether it's the fashion industry or other things. Certainly as we think about retrofitting housing, maybe the services that you need to make sure that all of those wonderful battery car charge points are keeping working. There are entrepreneurial opportunities that we could seize within our most vulnerable communities rather than allowing to filter off to those communities that are already doing well. I'd love to know what you're doing within your communities to make sure that we are seizing and keeping the value of those new green net zero opportunities within our territories, especially West Yorkshire.
Well, if I may, I'll probably start. So tomorrow I'm going up to Manchester, boo, to work with and to launch with Andy Burnham the Institute of Advanced Manufacturing in Rochdale, because this is what is important, and that's why we're all here, this collaboration to find the solutions to the challenges that are facing us in the future. And that's why when I became the mayor only 20 months ago, saying that innovation is going to be our way out of this. We've got to find those great ideas. And unfortunately, we don't in the North get as much support of financial support for research and development, so we have to do it ourselves. So the innovation festivals have been hugely successful, and the Mayor's Innovation Prize, which is £10,000 for a solution to the climate emergency, is exactly to your point, that the good ideas aren't just with graduates and people at university, they're also with people who are working in a factory setting who can find a solution to wasteful energy. You know, saying to young people, you know, if you've got an idea, you could, with Innovate UK, get this prize money and also then be supported to develop your idea into a business opportunity. But I would say when we're talking about inclusion, when you're talking about startups, and this is the field we're in, the startup, you know, somebody's got a great idea, they leave university, they want to start a business. When it comes to venture capital, if you're a female-led organisation, you get, I think it's 1.6 pence to every pound that a male-led organisation will get. If you've got a guy working with you, you get 12p. So thanks, fellas. You give us a few more pence to the pound. That's where I want to do a fair bit of my work, is supporting those ideas that aren't in the usual frame, that is people that haven't been to university, people who are locked out of venture capital, that we need to bring them into the tent and say, you are part of that solution. And advanced manufacturing is the way forward. And I'm really excited that very soon, the next month or so, we're launching the first ever space hub in West Yorkshire. And we know that a lot of those space innovations then come down into the real world to then solve some of our problems. And we're very famous in West Yorkshire for textiles, and a fair bit of our textiles and that innovation around textiles are also used in space and vice versa. So we know that innovation is the key, but who is allowed around the table is also important. So that's why I've got a West Yorkshire Enterprise programme, which is £6 million, but we have quotas because we're old-fashioned, old school, that we say 50% must be women, 25% people of colour, there must be a decent percentage of people who would declare that they had a disability. We have to get different voices because we've tried the old voices. They haven't necessarily provided the solutions we need. So let's open it up to new ways of thinking.
Thank you for that. And one last question from the audience before we turn it back to the panel. And I see right there.
Thank you for that. And a very good evening. I'm Tazeen Jaffrey. I head up the Mary Robinson Centre for Climate Justice at Glasgow Caledonian University. And Susan, we are our friends and neighbours. And again, welcome. For me, there's no doubt that procedural justice lies at the heart of the process to a just transition. And I would just love to hear from any of the mayors how they ensure that procedural justice is followed in their approach to working with communities. And secondly, it strikes me that to be able to make a pivotal change and a rapid transformation in this area, we need to get the stories out there. But what I don't hear enough of is how do we know that any of these transformations are making a difference and what impact it's making to those communities who we always say the poorest are always left behind. I would just like to hear your thoughts on our approach to procedural justice, and secondly, what approaches you have for measuring that impact on the lives of people.
So who would like to take that? That's a big question. Procedural justice. We're still trying to get it right.
I'm not 100% sure what you mean by it. Procedural justice? You mean the way our normal processes work and discriminate or institutionally discriminatory? Is that what it means?
That's the way I read it, but maybe you would like to define how you perceive procedural justice so that we can answer directly.
So in terms of procedural justice, what I'm talking about is ensuring that the voices of those communities are at the table and that they are part of the solution. So, it's easy to come round a table when you're suited and booted to talk about, for example, greening infrastructure, because who doesn't like trees? But we know that planting trees in city centre landscapes can bring problems in itself in terms of alcoholism, vandalism, in terms of feeling unsafe for single mothers and so on. So it's ensuring that those voices are part of the development of the solutions and the planning process at the outset.
Understood. Yeah. Any thoughts on how you're bringing the community in?
I mean, I think this is very much a work in progress. I don't think, I've not seen anywhere, and this is something I've looked into a lot, I've not seen anywhere that, that anybody's got a foolproof solution for saying, we got this group involved and this was the benefit for them, this was the outcome. I think partly, just as you identified, to seem the complexities that are involved in this, there's so much nuance, so many of the things that we approach and go, that's the solution, this is a solution. Actually, you dig down a bit. For some people, it might not be a solution. It might actually cause them further complication in their life. And if you haven't asked that question to begin with, then you're not going to know that. And you've invested the money in it, and it's too late. So I 100% agree with Marvin that getting the cash is key to delivering this. But we also need to take the breath and do the design properly and not rush into it too much. Or too quickly, rather, although we still need to be pretty quick. It is a challenge. I mean, I think the approach that we are trying in Glasgow, and we're starting to see some success on this, is talking about what we might talk about climate change or sustainability, but actually saying it's neighbourhood improvements. It's things that will make an immediate difference to you and will also address the climate. And particularly, I think, for older generations, that's the kind of way you have to approach it. For younger folk, they want to talk about climate. They are absolutely want to talk about it. One of the projects that we did at COP26, which you and your colleagues at the Mary Robinson Centre were really closely involved in, and that we called Girls at COP. And every single roughly 14-year-old girl in Glasgow schools attended a session. And we had different themes. So one session talked about employment opportunities in the context of the climate emergency and addressing the climate emergency. Another one talked about fast fashion. Another one talked about girls and women making their voices heard and being at the forefront of the conversation and how they would get past barriers to do that. And we've now embedded that in our schools as a process, and in fact it won an award, which was really nice, a Sister Cities Award actually from the US, and an education category. And I've been going round the schools giving what are now a year older girls a certificate to say thank you, you won this award essentially. And what has been absolutely brilliant is to see the work that they've done in the subsequent year that was triggered by those conversations that they had on that one day that they were involved in it back at COP26. And what I particularly liked was on the very last day, Mary Robinson herself turned up, the former President of Ireland, and she had inspired the series with her phrase, where the solutions, where the problem is man-made, the solutions are feminist. And so many of these girls are they're going around with their tote bags with the solutions are feminist written on it. And they've really, really taken this. And one of the girls actually said to me, and I thought, this was the best thing, the best definition that I've heard. And this is what we need to be doing with communities right across the city, embedding this kind of understanding in them and this kind of empowerment in them, where she said, the solutions are feminist doesn't mean that it's up to us to do it all and that we let boys off the hook. What it means is all these problems were caused in an unequal society. So we're only going to fix them by making society more equal. And I was like, that is perfect. That is, what a perfect definition of what we're trying to do with the just transition. And so we managed somehow to embed that thinking and action coming out of that and leadership coming out of that in that generation of girls in the city. If we can replicate that with other groups of marginalised citizens, whether they're marginalised through poverty or ethnicity or combinations of different factors, then we start to create that force, an empowered force of communities who feel that they are able to and have been enabled to step into leadership roles in designing these solutions. I don't think that we've got there yet, though. It is very much a work in progress.
Mayor Rees, I think you had a thought, and then we'll turn back to one last question.
So on inclusion, I think there are a number of gateways in. In the last 4 weeks, I've had 2 sets of parents in my office whose children were stabbed to death, right? One of the things I've challenged some of the kind of people who on environmentalism who have not necessarily taken account the social context in which we're trying to do this is we have to look at the challenges people are facing right here, right now, and earn the right to say, actually, there's a bigger existential threat to your existence we'd like you to take charge of. So making sure people can afford to eat, can afford to live in their home, then we make emotional and financial space for people to engage in broader political questions. I think that's really important. We do need to proactively reach out and make sure, as Tracy's just saying, that our tables are inclusive. And again, I think that's linked up with the third point I referred to at the beginning about you need a greater diversity of thought in leadership positions. I came into politics through someone directly challenging me, Lord Simon Woolley from Operation Blackvote. He said, Marvin, you got a great analysis on why the world is rubbish, but what are you actually going to do about it? And the challenge was for me to get off the touchline, step onto the field of play with my imperfect self, join an imperfect political party in a broken political system in a fallen world, and try and get those things lined up and get a victory every now and again. But when you do have greater diversity in leadership, they can hear more voices. They've got relationships through which bring more people to the table as well. The last thing I would just say, is we've just done a deal in Bristol called City Leap, and I'm really happy to share more about it with you. It's going to be £1 billion of investment over 20 years. But one of the points we make with City Leap is that we want the companies that are involved, Ameresco and Vattenfall, to look at our local supply chain, right? Proactively go out and look at the local companies who can begin to benefit from this economic opportunity. Now, my cousin lays floors for a living, right? He's a sole trader. He has not got the time to think about bidding for big contract. But if we could create spaces for lots of local contractors to come together, form a cooperative, and then come in and bid for the £1 million, £2 million contract, right? We can support that inclusive economic development. That means that local businesses, some of those who were first to be hit hard, can start to say, this is working for us, right? And they become part of that language amongst taxi drivers and all those other people who set your city tone, right? To say, this is good, let's stay with it. And you don't lose the dressing room. And dare I say, in this transition, if we lose the dressing room, we will create political opposition to the scale and pace of change we need to deliver.
And I just want to add, what you're hearing is a level of deliberate intentionality applied to making sure everyone has a seat at the table. At the height of the pandemic, we had a grant program for African-American women-owned businesses. And we gave them $3,000 grant, not loans, which took the attention of Vice President Kamala Harris, who came on April 1st with our congressman to spotlight rural America, rural communities, small businesses, but also creating that space where folks are able to, and Marvin just said that, benefit from government contracting. So we created a model contractor program in Greenville where Black and brown businesses could not only learn how to apply for contracts on a local level, but also on the state and federal level. We did it in conjunction with our congressman as well. And you can see that level of community distrust being a little bit evaporated, still exists, but you still see folks feeling that they have a part in the solution, a part in the success. And then, folks that are black and brown tend to hire folks who are black and brown. And so when you begin to talk to them about that, you begin to see that they are creating that space in the community where folks get jobs, folks can talk about how it has benefited them, and then you kind of get back to erasing some of that community distrust. But those are just some of the things we've done in Greenville.
Thank you for that. I think one last question from the audience, and then we'll turn back again to the panel.
Hi, my name is Bukumi Aloyede, and I'm from the Amos Bursary, and I'm 17. And one of the big things that have brought me to this discussion was the idea of economy. So I'm sure the economy is very different depending on where you guys are situated, but I'm really interested in what business tax incentives you guys have been looking at or potentially will look at to kind of pump more money into all of the great things that we've been talking about today.
Thank you. That's a great question.
It's a very smart
The
question.
potential financial mechanisms. Who would like to take that on?
I'm happy to jump in. And in the cost of living crisis, one of the most powerful messages that we can get out is not necessarily about tackling the climate emergency, but bringing down bills for homes and businesses. So we've been running a scheme with business. It's a grant, funded grant, that we will see your process, your manufacturing process, help you identify where you can make green interventions that will then eventually save you money on your bills and then support you to then use that extra money to reinvest in hiring more people and making, expanding your business or whatever. But also when it comes to green finance, I think this is the thing that is perplexing most world leaders, because as Marvin said, there are corporations who are desperate to invest, but there are not the vehicles where people can say, this is how you get your money back. So for example, mass transit. We need a mass transit in West Yorkshire, in Leeds. We are the only European city that doesn't have a mass transit. It's a £2 billion project. You can see that as an investable proposition because of the potential fare box in the future. However, if you say retrofit all my 300,000 social homes, where is the money? Where is the funding? Is it like you take out a green mortgage? That mortgage then goes to the next person who buys your house and they carry on that green mortgage. This is the perplexing problem. And that's why I'm really pleased that the Infrastructure Bank have placed their headquarters in Leeds, and we are working with them really closely to identify how we can model green financial packages for loads of companies from all over the world that want to invest, but how do we make sure that they are really happy with patient investment so that they will not be wanting that return in the next 10 years, that this is like a 50-year project that has to support our communities. It isn't, you can't be in it for the quick win. You've got to be in it for that patient investment. And I'm really pleased that in Leeds, we are a centre of excellence when it comes to green finance, and we really are pushing the boundaries. But that's a great question. Are you doing economics A-level? Maths, physics and art.
Impressive. Yes.
You're a legend. That is STEM right there, isn't it? Thank you for that question, but it is a real challenge for all the mayors. How do we unlock the money from big corporations to deliver for our communities?
And let me say, looking at nature-based solutions, and I think MRCTI has done a really good job in partnering with Ducks Unlimited. Sometimes it's not about giving money to the problem, but it's also about telling that business, that resident, that you're not taxing them with the problem. So what I mean by that is the nature-based solutions that we're looking at by working with Ducks Unlimited is looking at about 66,000 acres of land to sequester carbon. And so in the near term, we're going to do about 160,000 tons of carbon. We've identified 5 areas. We work with Black & Veatch, Cargill, One Architect, 2 Degrees Adapt to look at the 2019 flood to see what areas on the Mississippi River. And so we've had $230 billion in disaster losses since 2005. And so what we want to look at is go to the reassurance industry to see how we can do some carbon credits. But also, if we are able to do these land absorptions, we're reducing methane release, but also with this drought that we're coming out of. We had a really big drought. In Greenville, we had barges that had $50 million worth of grain stuck in mud because of the drought. And so if we can get these reconnected floodplains, we can get these nature-based solutions and absorb the water, we can release the water to let product go up and down the Mississippi River. What I mean by not charging your folks is there is a shared benefit with Cargill and some of these global companies that got product on that water. So what can you give to help finance these nature-based solutions? What can you give so I don't tax my folks in Greenville or my business in Greenville? But what can we do together to make sure your product get to market, you're producing what you need to produce, but we have green infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure?
Thank you. So it's been reported from the International Labor Organization that 24 million jobs could be created in greening the economy, but 6 million jobs are also projected to be lost. Supporting all workers in the transition to new jobs and generating decent, safe, and sustainable jobs of the future will clearly demand addressing the underpinnings of social and structural imbalances. Institutional racism, healthcare disparities, lack of affordable housing, as we discussed, and income inequality are top of mind. Achieving equity will require government, business, and labor unions to work hard together to build worker voices into the process, creating a culture that supports small business opportunities and discovering new ventures, especially in modernizing our infrastructure and technological innovation. It is essential to support investment, local economic programs, and prioritizing skill development, retraining in communities that have been historically marginalized and overburdened by pollution and underinvestment. What jobs are the future? We talked a little bit about it, but think more that are being created in your city. And what sort of, and probably more importantly, social protections are cities considering to implement in parallel to ensure a just transition to a green economy occurs and no one is left behind? And maybe we'll start with the Mayor of Yorkshire. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And I love your questions. They're so detailed. It's like, why do you need me to answer? That was just so fantastic. But I think that transition to the just economy and a just transition is really important. You cannot level up, and this is a phrase that we use in the UK at the moment, to have sort of a justice between north and south. You can't level up unless you tackle the climate emergency. You can't have, if anybody's watching or has watched Happy Valley, it was all shot in Hebden Bridge and in West Yorkshire, and there are communities and shops and businesses in Hebden Bridge that every 3 years they're washed away by flooding. It used to be a once-in-a-lifetime catastrophe, and now it's every 2 to 3 years. You have to support those businesses, on the one hand, making sure that they are protected from flooding, but also do all you can globally to offset the challenge of the climate emergency. But in doing that, there is a real opportunity for leaders to do that job creation. So I was able, as when I stood for mayor, to say, I will set up a green jobs task force, and we're going to get 1,000 green jobs, skilled jobs for young people. I'm halfway through my term. We're at 1,007, and I can see more jobs coming. But what was been really, really important from the Green Jobs Task Force is that businesses who have never spoken to each other, from the creative industries, from manufacturing, from service industries, have come together and shared their common challenges and learning from each other. And I think if the key that comes out of this session, the one thing is collaboration across sectors to deliver those jobs. But also it's about mayors showing leadership, that you can't just come in and create jobs that are then underpaid. So we are developing the Fair Work Charter, which will be encouraging businesses to sign up, that will give us the real living wage, because I've got to get more money into people's pockets to protect them from poverty, because poverty is the challenge as well when it comes to the climate emergency. Because if you are poor, you're more likely to have a prepayment meter that costs you more, which then means you don't put it on, which means that you are more exposed to health inequalities because you could get sick. So it's a many-pronged hub and spoke model. But that's the joy of being a mayor, is that as the police and crime commissioner, I can make interventions on solar panels on the police estate. As someone who has responsibilities for transport, I can say we're going to have more electric buses. We have the only fully solar powered park and ride in the country, Sturton, if you ever fancy visiting. I'm very proud of it. When it comes to safety of women and girls, we can look at what our parks look like, where the interventions around tree planting, etc. And housing in particular, skills, really important. When you talk to any mayor, they will say, when I talk to people who want to invest in my region, one of the first questions is, do you have the skilled workforce? Now, I can influence the workforce, the potential workforce, because I can implement skills programs in the green sector. So I can say to, let's just say, I don't know, a bus manufacturer in the green industries who wants to know they have a skilled workforce, I can say, I can guarantee you a skilled workforce because I will run those programs. So I'm working with business to get those skilled jobs, but also to ensure that young people understand what these great jobs are. I also have drawn together the West Yorkshire Careers Service, because often the careers advisors, in my day they used to be the gym instructor, but now they're more professional, but to make sure that the careers service also understands these great jobs that are available in digital, in manufacturing, in aerospace, that are green and clean but skilled, so our young people don't have to leave our towns and villages to get on and have a great life, that they can stay where they were born, where their mates are, where their families are, and have a fantastic job in a sector that is booming.
That was great. You said a lot that was really helpful. Any other thoughts? I can move on to our next question if you like.
Just share one challenge as well
Sure.
that doesn't always get registered. Actually, creating the conditions, the wider conditions that support a just transition. One is, I would never say I could guarantee it. We can only increase the chances of it happening rather than not happening. But actually, one of the challenges I'm facing at the moment is our financial situation as local authority. You know, no one turns up. We get protests all the time, right? Save our library, save our toilets, save our parks. No one ever says, save our lawyers, save our planners, save our accountants. But these are the backroom skills and abilities and capacity in government that create the space for you to be able to analyse what's going on, plan for the future, do the deals that make sure you get your share of affordable when you're contesting with developers for the amount of viability. And it shouldn't be, certainly from the UK's perspective of the 13-year journey of austerity we've been on, should not underestimate the impact on local government and our ability to play that role that goes beyond the provision of services, about being a place leader, to convene people, all the stuff that Tracy's doing, to get alignment, to spend time and resource doing that. Shouldn't underestimate just how much that's been hurt over the last 13 years. And there has to be an investment in governance. Projects, yes, but there has to be an investment in local leadership so that we can get those longer term plans in place that are evidence-based, developed by genuine expertise. I mean, the deal we did with Amoresco, that cost us £7 million and took 4 years. That was all at political risk because there was no government, there was no money from national government. It's releasing £1 billion, but 7 years. And during that, 4 years. During that time, the opposition and the journalists were predatorily hanging around, hoping for failure that they could talk about. But think about, in the face of austerity, we put £7 million aside to invest in getting that deal done. If I just share one comment, it was a chief exec from a corporation said, We know what needs to get done. We've got the technology to solve 80% of the problem. What we don't have is the financial innovation to release that technology into the hands of people who are actually going to use it. And I think that's, if I say there's one thing to take away, is about how we begin to connect that money, as we keep coming back to the places that are going to get it spent, get it invested.
In the United States, the zip code where you live greatly influences your quality of life, especially when it comes to differences in air quality and where industries are located. Undoubtedly, the transition away from fossil fuels will generate new senses of injustices and require co-education and robust community engagement. And more importantly, centering highly impacted community voices. In the US, the UK, and many countries, some approaches that are considered climate friendly but impact the most vulnerable are receiving opposition or delayed implementation. And notably, some of the community wholeheartedly supports the change, but other times are really conflicted because of the source of their income or because of their philosophical views that directly impact their family and their immediate family's needs. Real partnerships are required, and that collaboration, we keep repeating over and over, as well as trust, is really important. And so, Mayor Simmons, what are your thoughts around co-education and community engagement to support a just transition? And again, protecting the most vulnerable community members and those who have endured. Talk to us about the accountability that you're trying to put in place.
You know, I went to COP26 in Glasgow, and Mississippi is a red state. And so when you look at the Mississippi Delta, you had an area about a 38.6% poverty rate, but we have a high incidence of diabetes, hypertension. So you begin to see that these folks who get hit with the climate impacts also have health disparities as well.
You must have felt right at home in Glasgow.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, I got these Facebook folks online, you know, philosophical differences in a red state. Why he out of town? What he doing over there in Glasgow? We got issues here he got to face. Fast forward COP27, I'm in Egypt. Those same folks, and I'm sorry to say it, but they were white, red males in a red state, were calling saying, what you gonna do for us? Because my boat and my barge is stuck in the drought. So they're not using the word climate change, but they understand the climate impacts when it affect their dollar. That's the reality of it. The folks in Greenville don't say climate change, but when the flood of 2019 comes, they can't flush their toilet, they call the mayor office saying, Mayor, I can't flush my toilet. So when you begin to really bring it down to the lowest common denominator, it is how climate impacts affect individuals and businesses, and what can we do together to solve those things. And so we began to work with MRCT as a group of 103 mayors, bipartisan mayors, Republican, Democrat, because when a hurricane comes, or a flood comes, it ain't got no R or no D on it. It's just coming to cause impacts. And so we began to work with these mayors to look at the bipartisan infrastructure. We created the STORM Act, because what my folks wanted to hear is how can they bounce back and bounce back quicker to get back to work, produce their products, but also flush their toilets. And so we worked with Congress to create the STORM Act, and we have $500 million in the bipartisan infrastructure for the next 5 years. But it's gonna help when that disaster strikes, that flood strikes, or that hurricane strikes, where we can get a low interest loan to go ahead and bounce back quicker. Those things that we're seeing is helping our businesses, but it's also helping our individuals, but more importantly, it's helping Black and brown communities bounce back quicker as well. We also are working, like I mentioned, with the reinsurance industry. Before today, we had 2 meetings with the reinsurance industry to see how can we, when you look at the land, agriculture, and that sector, it accounts for a large amount of the emissions. And so how can we look at nature-based solutions to solve these problems, but also how can we get that financing? So, you know, being proactive in recovery and response and repair is better than being retroactive. And so if we can get the reinsurance industry to be able to help finance some of these nature-based infrastructures, get some of these carbon credits, it's just better for all of us. It's ecologically safe and sound, it's environmentally safe, but also it creates economic development projects as well on the Mississippi River Basin.
Thank you, Mayor Simmons. Any questions from the audience? Let's see if we can get a mic to those hands that are raised. And I really hear when you say the language that you use and how you speak about it in the community makes a difference on how people can be a part of that change.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Teresa Ogunetejuri-Nemwa. I'm 17, and I'm also from the Amos Bursary, like my friend Bakumi. My question was basically like, obviously right now in the UK, we're going through a cost of living crisis, and there are benefits available to those who are extremely suffering, and those who may not be on the higher, like, pay ladder, if that makes sense. But the issue is, like, with that, there's a lot of like disparities because those who are like on the middle pay ladder don't get enough support. So is there anything that can be done to help those in your communities or boroughs or councils? Does that make sense? Sorry, it's not the best, but yeah.
No, it makes sense. So what programs are you all doing to help with those who are really struggling during these times?
No, it's a perfectly spot on question. We've done something that's very basic entry level, as it, but I don't mean that the intervention is basic, but I mean it's really, really meeting those basic needs. This time last year, as we were heading in, as the cost of living crisis was beginning to ramp up, we started anticipating we started anticipating the additional impact of the fuel prices going up, just at a time when people needed to put their heating on. Susan referenced this earlier on. And this is, don't misquote me on this, but the blessing of the cost of living crisis in the spring was that people were turning their heating off, right? We were looking at October. So we started off by looking at, could we set up a citywide network of warm spaces where people would just go to be warm? And obviously so we put out an appeal, the model began to develop. So it's not just a place where you go to be warm, you can have something to eat. There are services there that can make sure you're getting all the benefits you should have access to. There are health interventions available there for when people depression, place of people to do their homework, charge their phones. And we started off targeting about having 20 welcoming spaces, and we've ended up with 94. But I think the real special thing about it is that we did not set them up. We as a local authority played what I call a development role. We put out an appeal for people to come forward, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, public sector partners that would come forward with spaces. Some of them we've provided finance to, a bit of finance. We've used some of our own money, and we had a very wealthy donation from a private donor who wants to remain nameless, who I would love to name, but they don't want their name out there. So some of those organizations were able to get some finance. Others have just stepped up, looked at their own resource and made the provision. And dare I say, one of the points we've been making in Bristol repeatedly is we have a cost of living crisis. The dilemma is we also have a cost of operating crisis. So just at the time when people need more from government, need more from the voluntary community sector and other support services, the cost of providing that support is also going up. So it's a real double hit on us at the moment.
What we did in Greenville, let me say this. What we did in Greenville was gave a city park to a housing organization. And it was a way to address the equity piece because we provided the land and created 42 climate smart apartment style living places. Had a waiting list about 350 folks. The rent was capped at a certain level. It had climate smart materials that we put in it. We use light and the environment to heat the units. And then we have the canopy over it. So when in other winter months, it's able to, where the sun comes in to heat it so you don't have a high energy bill. But it was a really good, we had the Home Loan Bank of Dallas. We had private donors. but it was really good. And what you found out was that, the working poor, like our teachers, our police officers, our firemen, were the first ones on the list. And so now what we're doing is looking for more city lands to give to this housing authority to begin to develop these climate smart housing. And that's a way where folks are not going to climate not smart housing, but being able to get into that, and we can begin to build our housing stock a more climate friendly way and keep the costs down for poor folks.
Mayor Rabin?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a really brilliant initiative. But to your point about those people on middle incomes, what are we doing for those families and those individuals? And actually, what I'm finding is people who would never have seen themselves as working poor are now using food banks. And that's, to your point, firefighters, police officers, nurses going to food banks. And October, we saw the crisis coming and were able to get out of the door £3 million straight away for our local authority partners to distribute through their community groups for 3 themes: warmth, food, and mental health support, because there are going to be people never anticipated being there. The challenge on their mental health, spinning the plates, trying to keep the house that they've worked so hard to get, or to keep the car on the drive that they've worked so hard to achieve, I think has been a real challenge. It's not helped by a government, this is not a political point, but just trashing the economy and we're just picking up the pieces.
Right.
But, or maybe it is a political point. But we have a challenge that goes above and beyond the energy crisis, and we are going to have to try and find ways to put more money in people's pockets. And that is why, for example, I've been able to widen the eligibility for free education, not just for those on the minimum wage, but we've widened it to the real living wage. So then there's hundreds, thousands more people have access to skills and training that hopefully will get them more money in their pocket because they can go for a job that pays more. But I think there are people in our communities in shock because they never anticipated being here.
Yeah, really similar experiences. We've also done welcome places, we've done grants, financial inclusion, and I think, to echo what others have said, the reality is local authority resources are constrained. So what we do have when we're getting out does tend to be targeted at the poorest. And so, there is that group who have never been poor before and find, or never considered themselves poor before, and find themselves now in poverty to all intents and purposes, simply because the cost of living for the first time is outstripping their income. And there's we can mitigate that at local level, but Tracy's right. This lies in the hands of others who created the cost of living crisis in the first place, ultimately to solve. But I think actually it comes back to a point in relation to the discussion we just had about green jobs and skills and all of these opportunities that are being created. And there's a danger in there as well. When we talk about just transition, it's often focusing on, and this is very often the case in Scotland, where we have a very big oil and gas sector, fossil fuel sector up around Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland, one of the oil and gas capitals of Europe. And it is about those jobs that we know are going to become obsolete. And I'm always arguing it isn't just oil and gas. It's also, people who work with petrol engines are not, those skills are not going to be required in a pretty short space of time. But I think there's also a real danger of another unjust transition where all of the jobs that exist in society that right now are often low-paid jobs done by women and people of colour, that we're still going to need, that society's still going to want people to clean, people to service in shops, people to service in restaurants, all of those, people to cut our hair, all of those roles that are absolute, that foundational underpinning economy, still will need to exist. And a lot of people will want to do those. Not everyone is going to want to go and get green skills and go off and do something at the cutting edge or in something that they'd consider to be a green industry. So there's a couple of things we need to do. One is all jobs have to be green jobs, and everyone has to be enabled to work in a sustainable way and to do their job in a sustainable way. And that's the job of employers to do that, as well as governments at all levels. But also it is this thing about the opportunity that tackling the climate emergency gives us also has to be about fundamental economic transformation. So that it's not just if you've upskilled to get into a green job that you will have a better quality of life, that you will earn a decent wage, that you will have opportunities for career progression, that you will be represented in your work, you will have a voice in your workplace. That needs to be the case for everyone, and particularly those who, with the best will in the world, are either not going to want to, or simply often because of their age, their place, their time of life, are not going to be seeking to grasp new opportunities and new careers. There is a danger there that they will get left behind, I think a very, very real danger. So it isn't just about the obsolete jobs, the soon-to-be obsolete jobs, it's about the jobs that have always been undervalued and underpaid, and making sure that all of these benefits that we know that we can gain from investment in climate transition reaches those parts of our economy, as well as the parts of the economy that we label green or see as being traditionally green.
You know, it's really interesting. We keep going back to the necessity for new financial mechanisms to pay for all the needs that are required to bring us into the future. Do any of you have thoughts? Yes,
Now,
Mayor
I just want to
Simmons.
say, and that was just great, Susan, but 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we were talking about everybody need to go to college. Everybody need to go to college. And then, now it is, well, going to college is just not going to college, it's picking up a trade. So we have to work with our junior colleges and even at the high school level, talking about these green jobs and green opportunities, because everybody's not going to have the skill set, and everybody ain't going to go to Jackson State or Howard like me. But if we begin to talk as early at the high school or even at the junior high level about these green jobs and getting our youth engaged, they are our future, and they're going to make sure we have a green world.
Yeah.
Be real. They are.
Thank you. Another audience question.
Is that right? Hi.
Hi.
My name's Mohammed. I'm a student at Cambridge University. And my question was, how do you deal with, obviously very ambitious plans and they sound great, but how do you deal with the prospect of a president or a prime minister that do not believe in a climate emergency or might pull out of the next COP agreement? And how does that sort of influence and affect your plans?
I would just say what we've always said, even at COP27, standing beside Mike Bloomberg talking about climate bottom-up action. It really matters not if a prime minister or a person at that level is not for it. I think it starts at the local level. It starts with you. It starts with our businesses and individuals, but I think it starts with mayors who see the folks and who gets those calls day in and day out when a climate impact or a climate emergency happens. And so if we can keep focus on bottom-up climate action, I think when it gets to the top, it's going to pass you over, or you're going to join on, or it's just going to blow you by. So.
Yeah. And there are plenty of leaders of nation states who really talk the talk on climate change, but they ain't delivering on it.
Yeah.
It is all talk.
Yeah.
And arguably we might well be in a country right now where that's happening. Eric's absolutely 100% right. The mayors are just going to have to keep getting on with it and pushing our plans through and doing it in partnership with others, in collaboration with others, and kind of reaching round and under and over national governments in order to make other collaborations to deliver for our citizens.
The reality is my children don't like to go to Walmart, Kroger, or a grocery store with me because I get stopped everywhere I go. And that's because we right there where the rubber meets the road, folks are going to call the mayor. I mean, keeping it real. They're not going to call the governor. They're not going to call the president. They're going to call the mayor. If a cat is in the tree, if they can't flush their toilet,
A
if it's
pothole.
a pothole in the tree,
Pothole.
they going to call the mayor or alderperson or county. They're going to do that. And so that's where the action is, and that's where we need to lead from.
So we're coming close to time. I think we could talk for hours about this. So maybe let's just leave one pearl of wisdom for everybody. Just something that you can think of that you want folks to walk away from this talk and really take back to their own city and try to initiate or think about strategies and procedures that have become really important in the work that you do.
I guess I would just say a quote from Jane Jacobs. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only when and only because they're made by everybody. And so if we're going to lead in this action, if we're going to lead in this climate performance, if we're going to do anything regarding just transition, everyone has to have a seat at the table, and everyone deserves to lead in their cities.
Thank you.
For me, I would say cities and regions like mine, which were centres of manufacturing, were the problem, part of the problem, but also with the right leadership, we can be the solution. But I would also say that everybody in this room is interested in the climate emergency. We need you all to step up, get into leadership positions, come and work with us, join us, collaborate, work with organisations. It's all well and good, you know, being interested and being at this discussion, and I'm so grateful to see you, but we absolutely need you. You are all part of the solution. We cannot do this on our own. So certainly to the women in the room, step up.
Engage, I hear that. Mayor Rees?
That's spot on, stepping up. I talk about touchline profits, people who are on the edge of the field of play, commenting on everyone that's on the field, never stepping over that chalk line. We need people on the field of play. But I actually think we have some real hard deadlines coming up. And I don't just mean like the creeping planetary destruction. I mean COP. And what I would ask everyone to do is talk to your own city leaders about working with other cities, be it through, League of Cities, US Conference of Mayors, with M10, with key cities, core cities in the UK. And why don't we make sure that by the time we get to COP, and I don't mean when we are at COP, that by the time we get to COP, right, a framework has been put in place that has 100 20-year plans to decarbonize cities, right? And by that, I mean 100 of the world's premier cities, 20-year plans. It can be done, right? It just takes a resource to do it. And I think if we go to COP with the framework in place where we are signing the deals, we got something to talk about. Otherwise, we go there, we end up with a bunch of declarations that aren't attached to dates, real places, or financial vehicles. And that's the most dangerous outcome from COP that we could leave with.
Right.
Get accountable. Leader Atkin.
So I think it's very easy to feel very fatalistic about the climate emergency and to feel a bit hopeless sometimes. But I think when you are in a position of leadership, or you're seeking to in whatever leadership role it is, in your own life, your own community, doesn't have to be elected. You do have to convince people that this is possible. And not only possible, but that it is completely worthwhile making the effort and doing all of this hard stuff, and that it will be worth it in the end. But also that it's worth getting up in the morning to do this for. There needs to be a bit of optimism and a bit of hope about our ability to tackle the climate emergency and to get our act together on this. Because I think if we keep saying to people, if you don't do this, or worse than that, if you don't stop doing what you're doing, then we're all going to hell in a handcart and the planet's doomed. The more you tell people they're doomed, I think the more likely they are to just pull the duvet over their head and go, nah, don't want to hear you, don't want to hear you. If we really want to mobilise people, we need to show them a clear pathway to actually getting what we want, actually delivering this. And as everyone else has said, I think cities and local government leaderships are the people who are doing that right now and need to keep doing it more.
Thank you. And I think Mayor Simmons had his finger just
Real quick, there was a climate mayor who was on his way to give a very powerful speech at a climate conference. But his 6-year-old son kept coming in, bothering him. He could not get it right. He could just not work on his speech. So what he said he'll do will give him a 10,000-piece puzzle of the world. And he said, surely that will keep him busy while I get ready for this talk. In less than 6 minutes, his son came in there with the 10,000-piece puzzle of the world put together. He said, I can't get this speech together. How did you do it? And his son looked at him and said, you see, on the other side of the world was a picture of the man. And once the man is right, the world is right. And so I just want to end with that.
That's why.
And challenge all of us. If we can get ourselves right, look in the mirror to put this fight to any climate impact, any emergency, and do it from bottom up, the world will be right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Very wise. Very wise.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for all your wise words and insightfulness. I just want to say just a few quick things just to wrap us all up in this thought. This is the decisive decade for the world to confront climate change collectively and avoid further irreversible impacts of the crisis and on our families and on our homes. Not one single person is immune from the devastating effects of climate change. We are interconnected. You hear that today in this panel and what needs to be done. No one can sit on the sideline of inaction. And the action simply is transforming the way we move, live, and work swiftly away from the dependence of fossil fuels to more sustainable and healthier ways. And at this point, we can't emphasize enough how important it is to ensure vulnerable communities, marginalized communities are at the table helping us to plan that future. They must be prioritized in building back better with infrastructure of the future and those communities. Easier said than done, right? But I'll submit to all of you on the 8th day of Black History Month that we've been here many times before. In fact, there's a popular African-American expression, making a way out of no way.
Wow.
My ancestors who endured slavery were told that it doesn't get better than that. They fought, and it did. My parents and grandparents who were told during the civil rights fight, doesn't get any better than this. They marched, and it did. And today, my generation and my daughters, am I not a man? Am I not a brother? Am I not, too, a child as we demand respect in the Black Lives Matter movement? The few became the many, and things are changing. And this is the same sentiment we have to bring to the just transition conversation. Where we are today is not as good as it gets, but we all have to do it together. So we look forward to this work with all of you.
Oh, so great spent time.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming out this evening. I know we had so many questions and we apologize, for not being able to get to them all. We do have a reception happening after. I do want to point out that we here at the embassy will continue to have these conversations. We will continue to work on our bilateral relationship to make sure that all voices are heard when we are speaking about equity and inclusion, and we will continue to have diversity in our audience. Thank you for coming, and once again, please make your way out, and we will all move out to the reception. Thank you so much.